we'll have a look at is everything you ever wanted to know about Britain in World War II. So you're probably extremely familiar with the American history of World War II. This is where we fit in the picture. So I will cut through all of that. They're going to do three main themes then for your benefit and delectation. If you're in modern Britain for a very short period of time, you may also recognise that we're obsessed with World War II. It's steeped into the culture. World War II is a pivotal point in modern British history. So we need to think, what are the memories? What do the British think about when they think about World War II? You think about Pearl Harbor, we think, and D-Day, we think about Dunkirk, Battle of Britain and the Blitz. So I need to explain what they are. We're at war for 6 years, from 39 to 45, so essentially, well, what happened then? Need to know that. And finally, what did we think we were fighting for? These are other key issues. Here, ooh, you can have that one, otherwise you'd be sat right next to me and that would make you feel so uncomfortable. So, in modern Britain, memories of World War II are still very prominent. And these are our main three themes. So if we take that first theme, modern Britain and the memory of World War II, what you've got at the moment in 2015, last year, is a whole series of 75th anniversaries, of which we are obsessed. So you will have Dunkirk, you will have the Battle of Britain, you will have the new £5 note with Churchill's face on it. But this is 75 years ago. How much of World War II are you familiar with beyond Pearl Harbor, D-Day and the bomb? Britain, we can give you chapter and verse on 6 years of it, but predominantly the period 1940. Everything tends to focus on that year. 75th anniversary takes you to 1940. 1940 is the pivotal year if you're British in World War II. 1940 is when the British Army in Europe is going to be comprehensively getting its backside kicked by the Germans and has to evacuate. We have to basically retreat from the Belgian coast at Dunkirk. It's a national humiliation, it's a total disaster. But we get the troops home, so you can spin that as, well, it may be a retreat, but we got the troops home, so technically that's a victory. So we tend to focus on that. Battle of Britain. Germany now dominates the entire continent of Europe. The last point of resistance to Nazi domination of Western Europe is Britain. So therefore they have to knock out the British Royal Air Force to then allow for an invasion fleet to cross the Channel and land. The Battle of Britain will be fought in 1940 by fighter pilots of the Royal Air Force to hold back the German Air Force, because if they lose, Germany invades, and we lose World War II, and by extension, you never come in the war until much later. There's certainly not going to be D-Day. That can never happen, because how can you send 2 million Americans in landing craft from New York to France? The only way you can do D-Day is if you've got a forward base, which is the UK. The UK falls, there's no D-Day. And then the United States has a 2,000-mile coastline facing Nazi-occupied territory. That potentially will be a problem for you, which is why Roosevelt will back us. But Battle of Britain, Dunkirk, and then Churchill's heroic speeches. All the big speeches that you associate with Churchill are 1940. If you look at the timeline, all the big ones that people put on the radios and put on CDs and play as inspirational speeches are from 1940. Why 1940? Because we're stuffed. You're on the 1 yard line from defeat and having the Nazi swastika flying over Buckingham Palace. So you're going to need some pretty good speeches to keep the morale up, because otherwise people could break. However, we don't. Britain survives 1940. It's a year of total crisis. We could lose the war, and then world history changes. Given this continuous memory of the Second World War, you might be familiar with this. You might have seen this about a lot. This is a lie. It doesn't actually historically make sense. This fits our memory in 2015 of events in 1940. This fits with keeping calm and carrying on. We're going to lose, but we're going to go down fighting. We might get invaded, but we're going to fight to the last bullet. We're going to be defeated at Dunkirk, but you're going to carry on. You're outnumbered 10-1 in the Battle of Britain, but you're going to keep carrying on. So this captures the memory of 1940. It's reissued at the millennium in 2000, and it's just been a global phenomenon ever since. But it doesn't say that. What it says is, when we are invaded and Nazi troops are marching around your town and marching up and down your street and swastikas are flying everywhere because we're going to lose, when they get on the island and conquer us, your job is to keep calm and carry on. This poster would have been issued if the Germans had successfully invaded the island. But its modern manifestation is in this, we pushed the Germans back and held out. So this is the key point to think about here is how memory can play with history. Historically, this doesn't work. Memory-wise, it fits perfectly. Stoic British resistance against overwhelming odds, the underdog, the backs to the wall. We love a good underdog backs to the wall thing, and that's how we've painted ourselves for the last 75 years. Isn't exactly like that. We're one of the world's major powers in 1940. We have the world's biggest navy. We have the world's biggest empire. There's Britain and 1 billion people in the empire behind. But that doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is of an island alone facing defeat. How did we get into that muddle? Well, a lot of thanks for getting into that muddle can be given to this individual, the Prime Minister in 1938, Neville Chamberlain. This is Neville Chamberlain meeting Hitler for a nice convivial lunch because this is a chap you can clearly do a deal with. He's not a psychotic maniac. He's someone you can drive to Munich, see, and get an agreement. And the Munich Agreement was designed to settle German grievances from the First World War. The idea was Germany's position is aggressive because of the First World War and grievances from how the First World War ended. If you can sort those grievances, then you take Germany as a threat off the table. And if you're Britain, you've got bigger threats. Britain has an empire in Asia. The big threat there is Japan. So you need a fleet to go to the Pacific. Or you've got Italy, which threatens the Middle East and the oil fields that Britain controls. So in terms of priorities, if you're the Prime Minister, where do you put your troops? Do you put them in the Pacific to face Japan? Do you put them in the Middle East to face Italy? Or do you have a land war in Europe against the Nazis? Well, if you're talking hard politics, a land war against the Nazis is not what we need to be doing. You need to be fighting a naval war in the Pacific. Therefore, practical politics is you make a deal with him. And that's exactly what he did, on the assumption that the deal would end any trouble with Germany. Chamberlain will return with it's the picture that haunts him for the rest of his days. He gets off the plane, he comes out with a little piece of paper with his signature and Hitler's signature on it, saying, I agree to be a jolly nice chap from here on in. There isn't going to be a war. Everything's fine. And Chamberlain stands there and says, we've secured peace in our time. Likelihood of Hitler keeping to that agreement on a scale of 1 to 10 would be 0.5. Needless to say, within a matter of months, that agreement is ripped up. And now, Britain finds itself at war. Hitler makes more demands on the border with Poland. Britain now draws a red line and says, you had the Munich Agreement, that was the last, that's as far as we're going to go. If you make moves on Poland, we're at war. Hitler doesn't believe us, declares war on Poland, 1939, 1st September. 48 hours later, 3rd September, Britain declares war. Britain, this time, unlike the First World War, which takes a long time to get really nasty, this time you're ready from the off. Germany is going to try to do what it did in the First World War, send U-boats out into the Atlantic. We're an island. Most of our food is imported. It still is. Most of the bread you eat in the refectory is wheat from Kansas. We import most of our food from North America and South America. So if we are an island that imports our food, you stick U-boats in the Atlantic, you sink all the ships, you starve the British into submission like you tried to do in the First World War. Countermeasure. Ration book. Everybody gets a ration book. You basically do not buy food. Food cannot be purchased. Food is available to you through food stamps. Everybody has X number of stamps in their ration book that they can go to the shop and get X amount of food each day. That is it. If you buy food, you go to prison. If you sell food, you go to prison. If you black marketeer food, you go to prison. Everybody, whether you're the Duke of Rutland over there, a gardener at Harleston, you have a ration book. X amount of food to make what food you can get in stretch to the whole population. So you don't have starvation, you don't have civil breakdown, and the Germans don't win the war. The nightmare vision, however, is not mass starvation. The nightmare vision is German bombers coming in, bursting through the air defences, targeting the major cities and dropping high explosive and gas on the cities, Armageddon, wipe out the population. Solution: evacuate every pregnant mother, evacuate every child, get them out of the cities. That's the next generation. The cities are going to be laid waste, therefore get the next generation out of the cities. Any of you familiar with The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe? Right. Why are they in the countryside going through the back of a wardrobe? Because they're evacuees out of London. Every kid will have one of those. If you look at photos of Britain in World War II, everybody's got this bloody cardboard box. That's your gas mask. By law, you must always carry your gas mask, because the assumption is the Germans are going to hit the major population centres with killer gas, and you've got to have your gas mask as well as high explosive. Getting out of the explosions won't save you, because the assumption is they will hit the cities with gas too. They don't, but the assumption is they will. So mass evacuation of you basically create a 5 million person internal refugee crisis through evacuation, plus you've got the fear of starvation going on at the same time. So you can start seeing why you need a few motivational speeches from Churchill. By the way, our army's just had its butt kicked. So it's about to get a lot, getting back to the butt kicking. Churchill takes power on 10th May 1940, because Chamberlain, not many people have a lot of faith in Chamberlain at this point. So he's fired. Churchill comes in. On the same day that Churchill gets the job, the Germans launch a massive tank assault or blitzkrieg through Western Europe on the very same day. So he's standing in the House of Commons. What are we going to do? I would say to the House, I have nothing to offer the country but blood, toil, tears and sweat. So that's telling you. We have before us many long months of struggle and suffering. You ask what is our policy? I can say it is to wage war, by sea, by land, by air, with all our might, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny. That's our policy. You ask what is our aim? I can answer in one word. It is victory, victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror, victory however long and hard the road may be, because without victory, there is no survival. As a nation, everything's on the line. If we lose this, we're a Nazi protectorate, and that's the end of Britain. So the Germans the Nazis launch this massive assault through here. Basically, everybody thinks it's going to be World War I again. In World War I, the Germans came through Belgium to try to get round the back of Paris. So the Germans come in here, everybody advances to meet them, but they've got a different plan. They actually come round the flank through here. So all the armies have advanced up to meet the Germans here, and then the Germans come round the back, cut all the armies off. There's no armies left here, and they spill over the rest of France. France is gone within a matter of weeks. France lasts 4 years of the First World War. France in this one lasts about 6 weeks. This is what leaves the British with no hope but to get to that port and try to get the hell out of there and get back to the island at Dunkirk. Given that it's a miracle, you managed to evacuate nearly 300,000 guys off of that beach. It's one of the great miracles of World War II. But you've retreated. You've been defeated. The Germans control Western Europe. The smart money now is make a deal. because you ain't going to win. How can we defeat Nazi Germany? We'd need to do a massive sea invasion, and we ain't got that kind of firepower. You'd need a bigger ally to do that, and they ain't in the war yet. So the smart money would be make a deal. Unless you're Churchill, who's like, screw that, we ain't making a deal with Hitler. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields. We shall fight in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We will never surrender. So now it's total war. Everybody's got to fight. It's back to the wartime. So you've got the army home from Dunkirk, but the tanks, the artillery, the heavy equipment, that's all had to be left on the beach. So you need to rebuild that army. To keep as many troops on the beachhead as you can, the internal defence, you have to form a home guard. He's too old to be in a frontline combat unit, but he can still fight. So he can be the second line defence. He's too young, and he's too young to be in a frontline combat unit, but that doesn't mean he can't fire a rifle and be in a second line defence unit. So you've got whatever troops you've got on the beach, and then you've got your reserve of basically teenagers and old men. But they can fire a rifle, so you've got a rifle and you fight, if they land. But the key to it is holding them on the beaches. So whatever combat troops you've got have to be on those beachheads. Hence we shall fight them on the beaches. But for the Germans to get to the beaches, they've got to clear the airspace so they can land troops. So the Germans now start sending those expected waves of bombers over the island just to blast the hell out of the Royal Air Force and major city centres. They're going to target St Paul's. Have you been to London yet?
Yes.
Have you been to St Paul's?
No.
The area around St Paul's is very modern. The reason it's very modern is because everything around St Paul's was flattened in 1940. This is St Paul's at night. The reason you can see it is because of all the flames going up from the buildings around it. So they're going to just smash the heck out of St Paul's. If you're a Londoner, you go to the tubes. That's where you can put them. You can put millions of Londoners on the tube lines at night to avoid the bombs. The key to it is if these two brilliant interceptor fighters can knock down as many German bombers, if you can keep these in the air and keep knocking German bombers down, then it becomes a war of attrition, and at some point we will tip the balance our way. And what happens is the British have two superb fighters, Spitfire and Hurricane, plus a secret weapon. British scientists have developed radar, so we know where the Germans are coming, so you can intercept and just hit them hard. And that's why you get, again, this classic thing from Churchill, never was so much owed by so many to so few. The Second World War in 1940 comes down to about 600 pilots in the Royal Air Force defending the skies over the UK. If they go down, the Germans come in, then you've got a different 20th century. But they hold, and that's why in World War II iconography and memory, the Royal Air Force is so significant to the British. However, Britain has been saved. It's avoided invasion. So it's 1941 now. What are you going to do to the Germans that the Germans have just done to you? The Germans have hit your major cities. So what are we going to do to them? Britain, to coin an American phrase, is going to bet the farm on air power. Building something the Germans never do. Huge four-engine bombers. The idea is to smash German cities, to destroy Germany's ability to fight the war, like they're trying to smash our cities to avoid. This is why Germany is all modern buildings and the UK is largely modern buildings. If you're British and you have a memory of the slaughter of the First World War, the last thing anybody wants to do is another North European land campaign, because the last one cost us 750,000 killed. So you're just not going to do that. If you can avoid a land campaign in Northern Europe with an air campaign to basically reduce Germany's ability and willingness to fight the war, then that's where the British will focus. And that's why there's all this huge focus in the UK on air power and the Royal Air Force. But whilst you now mobilise for a total war, so every adult male between 17 and 41 is now in uniform. Therefore, who runs the factories? every woman who's able to handle a spanner. You will make the factories work to produce the weapons that will win the war. So it's total mobilisation. The key to it, though, is calories. If you think about it, workers are doing 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. The army's at full capacity. You've got to be able to feed them. Now, Britain has the wrong kind of navy. Britain has a huge navy of battleships and aircraft carriers. It's built to go to the Pacific and fight a big war with Japan. That's the wrong kind of fleet. What you need are ships like that to convoy the food supplies across the Atlantic from the United States. That will fight you a major battle in the Pacific. That will get a convoy of food, fuel and ammunition into the UK. And we don't have them, we have them. It's the wrong bloody fleet. Now somebody has a lot of them from World War I, just sort of rusting away a bit. The trick is to persuade somebody to let us have them. So if you're Churchill, you go on the radio and into the States and come up with, if the Americans give us the tools, we will finish the job. And the Americans, bless your hearts, lend us 50 of these. That bridges the gap. There's a time lag. Britain is making as many of these as it can, but they're not launched yet. And you need to protect the convoys now. The Americans have these rusting away in yards all along the East Coast, and they will lend us those. Now, this is an intriguing point. When did the United States get into the Second World War? Because you're now lending warships to a competent power in 1940. So that's a year before that's 14 months before Pearl Harbor. And it gets better from the British perspective, because the Americans now develop the key piece of legislation of the Second World War, Lendlease. Are you familiar with Lendlease?
Yes.
It's the game changer in World War II. It's the absolute game changer. The American government agrees to provide weapons to all competent powers, and at this stage it will be the UK, but eventually all competent powers fighting the Axis powers, on the basis of, can you pay for this? No. Britain Churchill says to Roosevelt, we will go on paying you dollars for as long as we can for that equipment. But we'd like to feel reasonably sure when we can't pay you any more dollars, you'll give us the stuff just the same. You know, fighting against the Nazis. Now, if you're an American businessman, it's like, that's my tank and you pay for it. Somebody pays for that tank. If I'm building it, if this is General Motors Detroit Tank Works, General Motors wants to be paid for that tank. That's on order to the UK, and the UK is going, oh, we don't have any bloody money left. We've spent that. We've spent something like 100 billion in the first 12 months. We ain't got any damn money left. I mean, we're shelling out fighters, bombers, aircraft carriers, corvettes, armies, tanks. We're bust. We ain't got any more bloody dollars. Who pays for that tank? The American government will underwrite that tank for the duration of the war. At the end of the war, whoever gets that tank will either return it undamaged, somewhat unlikely, or pay for it, either in dollars or in kind. Whatever you've got. Basically, we will get money for that. The Brits finally pay off the Lendlease stuff in 2007. So, yeah, we borrowed a lot. But it was very good of you to let us have it at a slightly high rate of interest, but nonetheless, very nice of you to let us have it. Thank you very much. So Lend-Lease is the game changer. Now, if the Americans are lending the British the weapons to fight the war, if the Americans are creating the Lend-Lease model for the British to fight the war, then very clearly the Americans are in this war. And at some point, Churchill and Roosevelt will have to meet, and eventually they do meet on a battleship off the coast of Canada in August 1941. And in August 1941, they signed the Atlantic Charter, drafted by the Americans. That's the platform that you then get. You get the Atlantic Charter, and then you get the United Nations. That's all part of this American global agenda from the Second World War. But the clauses in that charter are very clear. And it's interesting, the document talks about the Allies. So as far as you are concerned, as far as the Americans are concerned, this is an allied power. The Americans aren't in the war yet. You haven't fired a shot at anybody yet, but you're using the term allied. The allied governments respect the rights of all peoples to choose the form of government under which they will live. They wish to see sovereign rights and self-government restored to those who have had those forcibly deprived. End of empires. So that means in 1941, the end of the Nazi Empire, the end of the Italian Fascist Empire. After December, it'll mean the end of the Japanese Empire. But longer term, that also means the end of the British Empire. So if you're the Americans, you will fight alongside the British, but we're not fighting to prop up the British Empire. We're fighting to end Nazism. But at the end of that, it's going to be a new world order, led by the world's biggest democracy, under the Atlantic Charter, that will then become the Charter of the United Nations, led by the Americans. And the Brits, you're going to have to fall into line. So you're starting to see the power shift. Britain is the world's greatest power at sea and on land in 1940. 1941, that's shifting. So the world has always focused up to 1939-40. After 41 and to the modern day, it goes through Washington. That's the power shift in World War II. And it happens 1940, 1941. That's where the West shifts from London focus to Washington focus, because the Americans are drafting it. The Americans are calling the shots now. And we're using American kit to fight the war. But if you are the British, where are you actually going to start landing some hits on the Germans, on the Nazis? Egypt. That's where we'll do that. Why Egypt? Why the desert? Well, we haven't got the firepower to go across the channel and reinvade France. The Americans do, but they're only just looking to maybe getting the war. The British, if you know your geography, on the other side of Egypt, you get in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. Britain controls the Middle Eastern oil fields. If you want your bombers to fly, and your fighters to fly, and your tanks to fight, and your ships to sail, they need oil. And we sit on the oil fields. The Germans are going to try to go through Egypt and get into the Saudi Arabian oil fields. Britain has to fight the Germans in the desert. That's where you can build an army. That's where you can get maybe a land victory, because we haven't had one yet. You get to 1942. Oh, hold on, where am I getting to? You get to 1942. And this guy, Bernard Montgomery, who was not a nice human being. Even one of his supporters described him as being as quick as a ferret and about as likable. But despite having the personality of a ferret, he actually gives Churchill the one thing. This is 42. Churchill became Prime Minister in 1940. It's 2 years into the war. Hasn't had a major victory yet. The Battle of El Alamein in North Africa is the turning point for the British. It's a land battle in North Africa. It allows the British to defeat a German army in North Africa, but it uses American kit to do it. It's American tanks, American planes. However, if you've now got that victory under your belt, psychologically you're going to be in a different place. And you can see it in the cinemas. Because if this is 1940, 1941, you're not going to have "we might win this" films. You get to 42, 43, you can do this film with the wonderful David Niven, God love him. You could do this film. This is 1942. In 1942, after El Alamein, you can make a movie looking back to the Battle of Britain, looking back to the dark days of the war, and actually say, yeah, we did that, we won that, that's fantastic. Or you can look back to the dark days of the war in the North Atlantic, fighting the U-boats, which have been defeated. These look back to bad days, but they have been defeated at the sea and defeated in the skies, and then you can make sure that Hollywood distributes them in the States to make sure there's a lot more support for the UK. So things are looking great in 1942. Unless you look in the Pacific, because now it's all going to go to hell and back again. If you're Japan, the major blocker on a southward expansion into the resource-rich areas of Southeast Asia. The blocker here has always been the British fleet. There's a British fleet at Singapore and there's an American fleet at Pearl. You take the American fleet out at Pearl, then the whole Army and Navy can come down here without any fear of the Americans hitting you in the flank. You can hit the Philippines, you can hit Malaysia, you can hit Indonesia, you can hit Southeast Asia, you can hit Thailand, Burma, China, India. You can't go down there if the Americans can hit you in the flank from Pearl. So take the Americans out at Pearl, put a carrier strike force to go out into the Pacific, hit the Americans at Pearl, and then the rest of the Navy and then the rest of the Army can smash down here, hit the British and take them out and take all of this. And we know the British can't do a damn thing about it because the British are fighting for their lives in the Middle East and in the UK and in the Atlantic. Where are the British going to find the reinforcements to hold the line here? They can't. If you're Japan, this is a golden opportunity. The British can't reinforce. Whatever they've got here is all they've got, and we can overwhelm them. If you take the American carriers at Pearl, because they're what will hit you in the flank. That's the gamble. Hit Pearl, take the empire in the south, because the British can't reinforce. This part of the plan works superbly. They annihilate the British. They take Southeast Asia, Indochina, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, southern China, Burma, they're heading towards India. This part of the plan goes absolutely brilliantly from a Japanese perspective. The problem is they miss the American carriers at Pearl. And that's your problem, because you've gone here but your flank's still exposed to the Americans. And the Americans aren't going to take kindly to you attacking their base at Pearl. And they're going to be slightly, to use a phrase, pissed. So, this is your problem. It's a two-part plan. What you want to do is get Southeast Asia. To get Southeast Asia, you have to ensure the Americans don't hit you in the flank. You take out the Americans at Pearl to go south. If you miss the American fleet at Pearl, then you've got yourself sucked into a Pacific war with carriers and island hopping and all of that campaign, but your primary focus was down here. And the British will, in time, after the colossal defeat of Singapore, finally start to get on the move again, thanks to Lendlease, with American tanks and Indian elephants. So you've got your logistics and your tanks combined. You will get an army that will push back in Southeast Asia against the Japanese. But no, of course, no one remembers this, because the Pacific War really is the American war. And so the British contribution on the land in Southeast Asia just gets completely overshadowed. And again, Britain forgets about it, because you're conquering territories that are going to become independent within 4 or 5 years of the end of the war. So it's largely called the Forgotten Army. However, whilst that's going on in Southeast Asia, things have changed here too. Because there's these two guys, and now there's that guy. Now, I'm the leader of a constitutional Western state. I'm the leader of a constitutional Western state. I'm the leader of a totalitarian communist nightmare. However, needs must. Oh, and by the way, that gentleman there, if you're interested, is Charles Portal, who was Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Air Force in the Second World War, and in the First World War was Commander of RAF Harlexton on the hill just behind us. So the guy who was on the hill up there in 1917, 1918, is the guy you always see behind him. Any official photo of him, you 9 times out of 10 see him. And he's a Harlexton graduate. Now, once the Germans decide to invade Russia, have any of you read Mein Kampf? Good. It's rather turgid. I managed about 4 chapters. But the essence of Mein Kampf is we're going to build a racially pure Aryan empire in the East, which means we're going to hit the Soviet Union. At some point in the Second World War, priority number 1 for the Nazis, tie things up in Western Europe, knock out the French, knock out the British, try to not piss off the Americans, but what the hell, they're on the other side of the Atlantic. That's house cleaning. Main focus, East, smash the Soviet Union, create an Aryan empire. 1941, he hits the Soviet Union. Now, we haven't talked to him for many, many years. But necessity is the virtue here. If he's fighting Nazis and we're fighting Nazis, ergo, our enemy's enemy is now our friend. Realpolitik dictates that you now have a three-way alliance. That gets the Germans in a vice, because there's German troops going to have to be in the east and the west, and that's how you can beat them. If they're concentrated, they're too strong. Divide them, we've got a chance. And that's what this meeting of the big three is. Now, he wants a little bit of pressure taken off, because the Germans are hitting them with everything they've got. He wants another front. He wants an invasion of France. Take some of those Germans out of Eastern Europe and get them into France. Take some pressure off of me. We can't do that yet. So the Brits have a plan. We've built this huge bomber force. We reckon we can hit the Germans so hard from the air, that they will surrender. That means we don't need to do a land invasion. That means you can have the pressure taken off in the Soviet Union, but we don't have to do a cross-channel invasion. The Americans are all keen for it. We're kind of like, it's going to bankrupt us. So this guy's given the job, Bomber Havis. Famously, he stated, the Germans sowed the wind, they shall now sow the whirlwind. The idea is, if you concentrate 4-engine bombers in formations of 1,000 bombers, you can deliver effectively a subatomic load. It's not a full atomic. If you measure the atomic bomb, this is a subatomic load, but it's almost a subatomic load. 1,000 of those, carrying 1,000 pounds of high explosive per plane, gives you 10,000 tons of high explosive. That's a subatomic load. If you drop that on Hamburg, Munich, Berlin, you will eventually get the Germans to come to the negotiating table. Dresden, which is the last of these great raids in 1945, still remains one of the great controversies of the Second World War. Is that tantamount to an Allied war crime? Is Harris a war criminal? These are questions that the British still ask themselves, because basically that's a Hiroshima-style landscape after what the British did at Dresden. However, in the context of 1945, the question has to be asked, well, what are you prepared to do to win? What do you need to do? This film is one of the most controversial films of the war. It has this character, Colonel Blimp. He's intending to go on the radio and argue. It is better to fight honourably and lose rather than to fight dirty and win. In the context of 1944, 43, 45, that puts him as almost like a Don Quixote-style character. The question is posed, what are you prepared to do to win? And the answer is 1,000 bomber raids on German cities. But it doesn't create the break in German morale. You will have to land in France, you will have to fight your way through France, you will have to fight over Northern Europe and get across the Rhine and into Germany. This plan does not deliver. So now the question is, how the hell do you do it? The Americans have a very straightforward, it's called Operation Sledgehammer. So basically, the Americans are just going to sledgehammer their way to Berlin. The British want to do it more gradually. And there is a tension in World War II between American generals and British generals. Montgomery and Patton loathed one another with a deep and abiding passion. There's real tensions here. It's an Allied army. British troops now come under American command. And that's pretty much the way it's always been since, actually. UK forces go into combat under an American general. If you're in NATO now, British forces go into combat under an American general. 1944, British forces go into combat under American generals. And we still do. The question is, if you are a general in the British Army in 1944, you were a lieutenant in the trenches in 1914. The losses and psychological and emotional hit of fighting in France in 1914 means the British will not take large infantry casualties. The Americans are much more willing to take large infantry casualties. The British simply are not prepared to do that. Politically, emotionally, psychologically, just can't. The British will do massive then huge bomber bombardment, then send the tanks in, and then send the infantry. The Americans are much more inclined to just go smash it all in, but that does create higher casualty levels. But the British are now committed to fighting alongside the Americans under American command on a land campaign in Europe. Big patriotic movies turn up. Shakespeare, Henry V. Are you familiar with Henry V and Shakespeare? Classic line, we few, we band of brothers, we will go once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more. He is landing in Normandy in the 14th century. We are landing in Normandy in the 20th century. Britain is now one huge armed camp. There is great movies about Brits and Americans meeting up and finding out that they have some things in common and quite a lot not in common. But Time magazine, are you familiar with the Bayeux Tapestry? The Bayeux Tapestry 1066? Well, this is what Time magazine does for the Bayeux Tapestry in 1944. Churchill, Roosevelt and George VI, with Eisenhower and Montgomery, the Mare Navigate D-Day, June 6th, Allied armies chasing the Germans and Hitler hiding under the throne. We're taking 1066 and doing it in reverse. And Time magazine, bless them, oh no, it's the New Yorker, puts it onto its front cover, which actually is a pretty satire. So, if we're looking at D-Day, the assault wave, if you're doing D-Day, there's 5 beaches: Gold, Sword, Juneau, Omaha and Utah. The Americans are going to hit Utah and Omaha. The British and Canadians are going to hit Gold, Sword and Juneau, creating 5 beachheads with paratroopers on the wing. Later today I'm going to give you a tour of the 1st Airborne Division stuff. They're in reserve, ready for D-Day. 6th Airborne protects that flank, and 1st Airborne would have been the reserve to go in to protect the flanks of the Allied landings. It's a huge success. The Allied landings work. The Allied landings push in. Germany now launches a cruise missile assault on the UK. World's first cruise missiles are these V1 Vengeance weapons. Huge explosive tip, and again a worry that they might put gas in it, but they just absolutely blast the UK with cruise missiles to again try to break UK morale. We get countermeasures against those cruise missiles. The one thing you can't do is these. These go out into space and land on London with 2 tons of high explosive in the top. They're the world's first ballistic missiles. The UK has the distinction of being the only nation in world history to be subject to a ballistic missile assault. So we need to overrun those really quickly and get them back, which we did. You're pushing forward. It's late 1944. How are we doing? Oh, 5 more minutes. It's late 1944. You're almost on the Rhine. There is Germany. You're almost there. And so the plan is now formulated by Montgomery. How can we win the war by Christmas? End the war and maybe get to Berlin, because it looks like the Soviets might get to Berlin first. And that could be a slight problem, because whilst we're allies, we don't like one another. Plan. You've got the 82nd Airborne. You've got the American 101st, and you've got the 1st Airborne Division sat here at Harlexton, hasn't fought anything yet since D-Day. It's been in reserve, it's fresh, it's ready to go. What if you drop the Americans on the bridge at Eindhoven, and at the bridge at Nijmegen, and then drop the British on the bridge at Arnhem? You then put an armoured tank attack up over those 3 bridges and swing round into Germany, and you win the war by Christmas. It's a brilliant plan. This is the 1st Airborne being inspected by George VI outside by the walled garden, back there just before D-Day. The problem is when they land slap bang in the middle of an SS Panzer division that's refitting from the Eastern Front. And the result is the division gets wiped out, and you can never actually get to that bridge at Arnhem. There's a great book called A Bridge Too Far. So what you're going to have to do in early 1945 is a full amphibious assault over the Rhine with the entire Allied armies. And here's the classic picture of Churchill with his cigar in an amphibious landing craft crossing the Rhine going, I'm going to kill Hitler. I'm going to get him and kick his ass. Churchill wins. Churchill's won the war for the UK. Well, actually, the Americans win, and we do very sterling work alongside. But Churchill has won. He was in the middle of the war. He was elected because the current Prime Minister resigned. He's never gone to a general election. 1945, to legitimize him as a peacetime Prime Minister, he has to now go to the country. So you would think, having defeated Nazi Germany, having saved the country from almost inevitable defeat in 1940, look at that, damn, I'm cutting through there. Having saved the country from almost inevitable defeat, he would win the election. He gets booted out. And the reason he gets booted out is very weird. Shakespeare's Henry V, you'd think it'd be the big blockbuster movie. It's not. This movie is. This happy breed, again, it's another line from Shakespeare, this happy breed of men. 1944. Ordinary folk, North London, suburbs, 1920s, 1930s, doing their ordinary lives and surviving and making do with all the family ups and downs. They're going to be the voters. And the thing of it is, in the middle of the war, what gets overshadowed by Churchill's speeches is the Beveridge Report, 1942, so it's right flat bang in the middle of the war. What are we fighting for? Yes, to save the country. Yes, to defeat Nazism. But what's Britain going to look like after the war? What's this brave new world? Well, if you fought the First World War, and then you get the depression of the 20s and 30s, and now you got a Second World War, all in your lifetime. When you come out of a Second World War and your cities are devastated, hundreds of thousands of dead, rationed food, a bankrupt nation, what the hell were we fighting for? Well, the Labour Party and he would say, well, you're fighting so your kids can go to school for free. And you're fighting so you can go see a doctor for free. And we're going to build new hospitals and they're going to be free. You survive bombing and rationing and the nightmare of the war, then by God, after the war, you can go and see a hospital for free. And if your kids have survived bombing and rationing after the war, there's going to be hospitals and schools. We've got to build new schools and they're going to be free. And we're going to pay for it with social security. If you're unemployed, you ain't going to starve anymore. If you're unemployed or jobless or ill, we're going to catch you because we all went through the war together. So when we talk, the reason we get quite so defensive about the welfare state and the NHS, which has huge problems with it, I mean, that'd be a lie to say they're not problematic, but we get really defensive about it because they are the results of winning the Second World War. That's the fruits of victory stuff for the population. And so Labour will put out its election poster of a soldier, Labour for him. You've won the war, now you've got to win the peace. And so if you think about it, World War II is integral to modern British identity. You've got Churchill's speeches, you've got the memory of 1940, the idea of the empire which you were fighting for, that's gone. So you focus on the island. You don't see it as a global history anymore, not like the First World War. You don't see it globally, you see it locally. And if you see World War II locally as the British, then you hear Churchill, you don't hear India. You hear his speeches, you don't hear Nigeria. You don't hear Burma. You hear the UK, Churchill, rationing, Dunkirk, Blitz, 1940, and the welfare state that came out of it. And that is what cements World War II in British modern identity with all of the problems that memory has with the war. So that's the historical facts, alongside what you might deduce in terms of memory and stuff while you're in the UK. And if you go around St Paul's, you're getting that same kind of memory and history overlapping. And that is a slight 5-minute over one, I do apologise. But there you go, that's me done. Any questions? No? Good, splendid. Have a lovely rest of the day. I believe I'm seeing you at 1 o'clock. Great, I've got another class to go to, so that's all right. Thank you very much. I do apologise for skimming so many stones over the surface there, but there you go.